The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's episode, one of our own is up for an award. We've discussed this earlier, but it's like he's reached the next level, guys. So we got to keep talking about it and encouraging him. We're so excited. Then we'll discuss cool annual events celebrating podcasting that are happening this month, and share a recent interview that Glenn had with a podcaster who has accomplished something that Glenn and I literally will never, ever do. And we'll end as usual by sharing a bunch of stuff on the horizon for the Florida Podcast Network and a valuable podcasting tip. This is Jemmy.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Florida Podcasting News Show.
We have an update, just a quick one on the IPA, the International Podcast Association, that we have the privilege of being two of the 9 founding board members of, guys. And well, just a quick update, we've received nearly 300 surveys so far. So thank you to everybody who has answered our questions. But guys, if you haven't answered the survey yet, you are missing out on getting your voice heard. So make sure that your voice is heard too. Go to internationalpodcastassociation.org/survey and fill it out. And also, I just want to tell you guys, I was so excited. I had a successful first run at teaching at Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And not only that, but I found out something really, really, really cool, Glenn. I wasn't 100% sure of this when I walked in the other day, but I asked the director, I said, hey, can you confirm something for me? He's like, what? I said, am I the first podcast instructor across all campuses? And he got this big smile on his face. He's like, yes, you are. I'm like, wow, that's exciting.
Does that surprise you a little bit?
You know what? I don't know if I'm surprised, but I am very, very pleased because for a school of broadcasting to be
it's
now
one of the
adopting
schools of broadcasting in the country.
I know. And for them to be, deciding that we need to teach podcasting, it's a one more little feather in the cap of showing that podcasting is a real, true, and accepted professional thing. We're not just hobbyists anymore, guys.
I've started calling her professor now.
You have. I am not that smart. Anyways, thank you once again always for tuning in. This show is released on the 1st and 15th of every month. And on the 15th, there's also a newsletter that goes right along with it. So if you don't want to miss out on that, go to floridapodcastingnews.com and make sure that you sign up to receive it.
Your parents are just finally happy you're using a degree for something.
For something. Finally, those student loans are doing some good. No, they're not.
So in some Florida podcasting news, Lee Silverstein, who we've talked about before, does a show, and it's called We Have Cancer. It's a We Have Cancer podcast. He's been doing it for quite a while. He was up for an award with the WEGO Health Awards. It's health industry awards over all different kinds of media, and they have a podcast category. And we all helped vote for him. Well, he's in one of the top 5, and we should know any day now if he was the winner of that. So
Yay!
Congratulations to Lee and all the top 5 in there. Good job. He's put a lot of hard work into that over the years. And some of those days he hasn't been feeling so good. So
yes. And his show is so powerful. I bring up his show pretty much anytime I'm talking to people about podcasting for one reason or another. If I'm talking about the power of podcasting, I almost always bring up his show. So if you want to check out his show, please go visit him and show him some love. He's at wehavecancershow.com. And coming up next week, we have the next installment of the Palm Beach Podcasters Meetup Group. That's the meetup group that I organize with Mr. Paul Desmond Adams, and we have a lot of fun putting that thing together. It's growing every time. So last time, Daisy Cedeno, who's a local podcaster formerly and kind of still also in radio, she did an awesome presentation called The Podcast Express. It was about launching your podcast from scratch in like 30 days. So if you go up now to palmbeachpodcasters.com, you can find the presentation of her video. You can find her slides, all listed under the August 27th event. But if you're looking to meet us next time, it's September 24th, also a Tuesday at Venture X in Palm Beach Gardens. And if you are an organizer of a meetup or other podcasting related event in Florida, please submit it to us by sharing with us via email. I'm Jemmy, Jaime, at floridapodcastnetwork.com, or Glenn, Glenn, at floridapodcastnetwork.com. And we'll talk about it also in the show.
And I'm hoping to make it to your next one. I'm coming down. We're going to do our next adventure in Southern Florida, and I'm hoping to be there in time for your meeting.
I know. I get to introduce you to all of my Palm Beach podcaster minions.
That'll be fun.
It will be fun.
Well, next up, we have one of our friends by the name of Steve Adams, and he is known as Mighty Blue. He does a podcast called Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail.
And he is mighty.
And he is mighty,
Awesome.
and you're going to hear what extraordinary feat he just did. But this interview, I'm talking to him about how he did the tech to get his podcast out while he was hiking 2,200 miles.
I mean, we think we do something really cool with Finding Florida and bringing our microphones out like 100 miles. He had it 2,200 miles. That's just insane.
Well, I have Steve Adams with me, who you might all know as Mighty Blue if you've been up at PodFest or at one of the meetings here in Florida. And Steve just completed his second hike of the Appalachian Trail. Just took him 6 months and about 2,200 miles. And you just finished, a couple of weeks ago?
I finished 3 weeks ago yesterday. Yes, I did.
Well, I've congratulated you on your own show because you had me host your show and ask you a whole bunch of questions after the hike. Yeah. And so I'm going to congratulate you on this show for keeping the podcasting going the entire time you were hiking.
Yeah, well, you're the person actually who told me before anybody else told me that consistency is important. So if I'd stopped my show just because I went for a hike,
I'd have kicked your ass.
Exactly. And you wouldn't, it turns out you wouldn't have been the only one. And people wanted me to carry on doing it. So I actually went and did the Camino de Santiago last year to test whether I could actually do a podcast directly from the trail. And I could. But it turned out this time to be more difficult because of access to data, obviously. Okay. But yeah, I worked out how to do it, and it seemed to go down really well.
Well, everybody listening to this show is podcasters, so I really want to talk to you about the technical side of what you did because it wasn't easy, and then the mental side a little bit too.
Sure.
So the technical side, you produced on average, I would say 2 shows a week. Yes. How did you do it?
I downloaded an app called Backpack. It used to be called, well, maybe it was just done by the same person, and it was very similar to an app called Boss Jock Studio. But this was much easier to use and far, far better. And I thoroughly enjoyed using it. And along with that, Backpack, yeah, ironically, nothing to do with, it wasn't meant to be, yes, nothing to do with hiking at all. It was called Backpack, yeah. And it was $9.99. And I got myself one of those lapel mics, which you can get for $20 on Amazon. And I actually used that on the very last show when I climbed up Katahdin. And I literally had it permanently on me as a microphone to talk if I wanted to. But for most of the time, I just used it as a regular microphone. And I would either sit in my tent or sit on a log or sit in a motel or a hotel room and just talk into the phone in little snippets. And then you compile the show with all the various little snippets, and then you run through and record the whole thing.
Were you doing that yourself on Backpack? Does it do the recording and you can also edit?
Well, no. You can do the recording, and you probably can edit, but I didn't work out how to do that. And frankly, my phone was too small for my big hands to be able to edit on a phone. But what I did, I had a young man called Ryan, a young man called Ryan who was at State College, Florida. Or Florida State. I never remember which one it is. And he received them. I put them in a Google Drive. That was the way it worked. I opened up a Google Drive, which we shared, and he picked them up. I sent 3 photos. I sent my show notes in a text, and then he picked them up. He did minimal editing. He put them through, I think, Auphonic, and then put them onto Libsyn and then my website. And it worked out pretty well. He knew, had a step-by-step process he did. So basically, it was fairly raw. If I made mistakes, really bad mistakes, I would restart the recording. But as these things were put together in snippets of 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time, restarting the recording is no real problem.
Right.
So, so I had all these different little snippets, and each snippet, once I was happy with it, and I nearly was happy with it pretty much every time, and just carried on working through that. So there was no major editing. I didn't take out any ums or ahs because, I would do that at home on my desktop machine, but certainly not, in the woods when you're exhausted after 12 hours of hiking.
And I think you wanted it. I think this is an important lesson too, just like when Jimmy and I do the Finding Florida show, which is travel adventure, you want some of it you want it to sound raw. I don't want to sound like you're in a studio when you're out hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Yes, I totally agree. In fact, some of the most popular ones the most popular one was the last one when I climbed up Katahdin, even though the sound quality was terrible. But the good thing was that people felt, so many people wrote to me, said, I really felt I was climbing up it with you, which was a wonderful thing to hear. And also the other really popular one, was when I was out in the woods and I heard, I could hear some birds in the background, and obviously the microphone picked those birds up, and people were enjoying listening to the birds, or the bullfrogs by a lake. So all those things became part of the atmosphere of the show.
It's the same way as if we're at a show and you hear a horse whinnying. The listeners
Absolutely.
love that. They love hearing the horse, the hoof beats or the whinnies. Because that's why they're listening, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, funnily enough, it was the footprints that went down. Not footprints. That they could hear my footsteps in the last show. So I was walking along while I was speaking, and that was ridiculously popular.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just was
more of that in the future. But so then you sent all that through, and then he produced it and got the episodes out. Now, you did basically a wrap. The way you did this is you did a wrap up of every day on the podcast. And then you did some remote recordings where you recorded musicians or other guests or things like that. When you did the remotes, did you just hold the phone with the app and no mic?
Yeah, what actually happens on Backpack, you can preload it with little MP3 snippets. So I preloaded with, you are listening to the Hiking Radio Network. I preloaded with my introductory music. I preloaded with my end music, and I put them permanently on the Backpack app. So I would fit them in position for when I was actually going to do the whole montage. Oh. And so they were already done. The new stuff, which was basically day 1, day 2, day 3, say, they were their own separate little snippets. I dragged them into the app, and it just worked really, really well. And once you've got everything in place, you then press record with no microphone, and you literally tap on the first bit that says you are listening to the Hiking Radio Network. There's a 3, 2, 1 countdown when it gets near the end, and you then press the next one. You literally go from one to the other to the other.
That's really cool. And now when you were interviewing other people on the trail, did you just use your phone without a mic?
No, I used my phone with the mic. I used I unclipped it, or I just brought it out and used the mic, which I carried on me the whole time, obviously, so it was convenient, and just held it between the two of us. I asked them to count up to 2 or 3.
That was good, actually.
It sounded fine, so taking a decent microphone may have been a good idea for some people, but I think people do get too bogged down by the need to have perfect sound. And I know I don't have perfect sound, but I think I know what my listeners like, and they seem to like those interviews. I had some girls singing, if you recall.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved everything you did that was musical.
Yeah, I wish I did more of it. And unfortunately, there wasn't as much more of it towards the end because, people were becoming a bit serious about the hiking, and there were less instruments and people singing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and your families, you had a lot of great interviews. Well, it was well done, Steve. It was well done.
I appreciate that.
And one last question is, how hard was it some nights to do that recording? I mean, it's hard for people sitting at home to do it sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't do it every night. I'd write my notes every night. And if I didn't record somewhere, I would wait until I was in a hostel or a hotel or wherever I was staying, or a motel, and I'd look at those notes and try to think back to the times they happened, and then just use those notes as my basis for the conversation I was going to have. And I tried to make each one about 5 or 6 minutes each day. I didn't want to overdo it, but at the same time, I wanted people to have a feeling of what each day was like.
You definitely did. Well done. Well done. Where can people hear it?
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. Mighty Blue was my trail name, so Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, and wherever all good podcasts all good podcasts I heard, I guess.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, buddy. Take it easy.
Well, that's great to hear from Steve. He was so dedicated. I listened to his show from episode 1, and he's been so dedicated about the show and never missing episodes. And he doubled up in the number of episodes while he was on the trail, and it was so much fun to listen to. And then when he finished, I could tell that thousands of his listeners, and he has thousands, were just cheering for him climbing that mountain. It was so cool. Good job.
And I know
Steve.
you're one of his biggest fans
I
because
am.
you've been telling me about Steve since you and I practically met. And then I got the chance to meet him at a Podfest, I think it was. And I realized just why you love him.
And we had dinner with him, remember? And
We sure did.
Yes.
We sure did.
By the way, I have to wish you a happy birthday because it was Demi's birthday this last week. And Steve asked me after the interview, he said, how old is she anyway? Is she really 40? I saw she was 40. And I said, yes, she's really 40. And he said the same thing everybody says. I thought she was 20. So happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. I was kind of hoping that would fly under the radar, but whatever. Thank you very much. And
So
thank
happy
you so much
40th
to Steve.
birthday, and please
Congratulations.
stop carding her while we're together so I feel old. Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses. Serving as a highly resourceful podcast production house, work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jemmy will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for podcast samples. That's flintstonemedia.com.
Well, just like it's exciting that the Connecticut School of Broadcasting is now offering podcasting stuff and helping us feel a little bit more legitimate as a profession, right? It's also cool to see other giants in various, pieces of the audio industry also taking us more seriously. And now Pandora, it looks like they're doing something really cool that's going to bring even more podcasters into their space. I can't wait to hear more about this, Glenn.
Yeah, Pandora was accepting podcasts on a selected and curated basis. And if you were with some of the Lipsons and some of the bigger hosts, you could maybe get your podcast in there. But now they've opened up, they actually have a portal that you can use to submit your podcast individually. So if you're an individual
like Stitcher does and stuff?
That's right. Or Apple, for that matter, right? You can actually, we'll put the link in our show notes. It's called ampplaybook.com/podcasts. And it's just their portal. You do have to have an active Pandora account to submit your podcast. So it's free. You don't have to pay. But you do have to have an account. And I went in and submitted ours, and they're all on there now. So definitely Pandora's huge. I use Pandora for music. Jemmy knows that because I play it in the car sometimes. So, and I don't know, do you use Spotify or Pandora?
For me personally, my consumption is always done in the Apple iTunes podcast app, but I definitely submit the shows to Spotify, submit it to TuneIn, submit it to Pandora. So actually it was really cool. The other day, I don't know what I was just bored or whatever, but I had Comcast open on my television, and in the apps that they have embedded in Comcast Xfinity, they have a Pandora app in there, and I clicked, I'm like, I wonder if Finding Florida is there, and boom, it came right up. I was like, that's awesome. Finding Florida is on my television. That's so cool.
I was in the Roku the other day, and one of our shows is called the Pladcast, and it's a magazine that runs the You've hosted or you've produced that show.
I've produced it. Yeah, I've never hosted. Oh God, they would hate that, but I produced it.
Well, I was looking through the channels in Roku. They have their own Roku channel.
Pladcast?
Yeah, Pladcast. So you can watch their videos and listen to the podcasts and everything right in their own Roku channel. And I didn't even know. So
Well, we need to get our wheels spinning for our own Roku channel for Florida Podcast Network, Glenn.
I know.
What is up?
It was crazy. It was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
That is very, very cool. So you're going to be able to provide that step by step. We're going to put it in the show notes, a link for Pandora to submit. Very, very cool. All right. So look in the show notes for that, guys. And just a couple of quick reminders here. We have talked about these in the past, but we don't want you to miss them because time is of the essence. So Beyond the Podcast Virtual Summit is on September 18th. That is right around the corner. And it is virtual, so you can literally do it from anywhere you are. And if you want to find out more about it, go back and listen to our interview with Kelly Force, the Marketing Communication Specialist at AWeber. It was just in our last episode, episode 15. or you can just go ahead and sign up. Go to aweber.com/beyond the podcast, and you'll find it right there. There's a link. Just sign up, and you'll get connected for September 18th. There's like an online community, conversations, and chatting going on. It's going to be really, really cool. And they have an amazing, amazing lineup of speakers. It's going to be very educational. So highly recommend it. And the second thing I don't want you to miss out on is International Podcast Day. That is on September 30th. And there's so much going on from all kinds of different people on International Podcast Day. So just Google it and find out if there's anything local to you or one of your Facebook groups or whatever that's doing something. But the actual official live broadcast for International Podcast Day, put on by the organizers themselves, happens on that day at internationalpodcastday.com/live. And yours truly has the honor of hosting one of the hours there. I go on at 12 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be talking about networks and networking, the kings of collaboration, with special guests, including Daisy Cedeno and Chris Kremitzos, and the wonderful, the fabulous, one of the most successful podcasters on planet Earth, Glenn the Geek Heaver.
Because we never worked together.
The crowd goes wild. What? So for more information on all of that, go to flintstonemedia.com/IPD.
You know, we're doing something interesting that week over to Horse Radio Network. What we're doing is we're doing the Week of the Pod. And we've already gotten the people, our Patreons are all excited about it. We're making up banners for Facebook. We're making Facebook banners or Twitter. They can use them wherever, Instagram, whatever. And it's going to say International Podcast Day at the top, but underneath it, it's going to say, I listen to, and then the logo of the show with the link to horseradionetwork.com at the bottom. So it's going to be a very simple banner so that the listeners can then take those banners and share them across everywhere.
Very cool idea.
So you could do that with your show. I'm just going to make them very simple. I listen to with the logo, and then at the bottom where they can go to find it, and that's it. And we're hoping what our listeners were saying is, I got to get these people who aren't listening to podcasts interested, but I need something simple to tell them where to go to how to listen. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to encourage all our listeners that week ahead and that day to just share. And you know, we're telling them, share whatever podcast you like, whether it's ours or somebody else's, but share a podcast that day. So really encourage your listeners through your show and social media to do that as well.
And this is one of the great benefits about growing a community like you've done, Glenn, and growing your listener community, because you can get this kind of feedback and these kinds of great ideas. So I think that's an awesome one, and I hope more people do it. But if you're looking for your own,
you make all the banners. No.
Anyways, let's listen to this commercial that gives you even more information on International Podcast Day.
International Podcast Day is September 30th, and you can help spread the word. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved? It's pretty simple. Head over to internationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. Then use hashtag International Podcast Day to join the conversation. You can reach out and connect with other podcasters, listeners, and your favorite podcast hosts. Remember September 30th, International Podcast Day, a day-long celebration of the power of podcasts.
Well, in network news, we are headed to Miami for the Finding Florida podcast with Jemmy and I are headed to Miami. If you're local to Miami and have suggestions or want to meet us out, reach out to us, Glenn at floridapodcastnetwork.com or Jemmy, Jaime, at floridapodcastnetwork.com, and watch for details to start coming out soon on the findingfloridapodcast.com/next adventure.
And all I can say is, if any of our stops have to do with seeing girls in bikinis, you need to make sure, if you're local, you are there to watch Glenn's head explode. You can barely handle the bikinis on a regular beach, but on South Beach?
I have never been to South Beach.
It is going to be an interesting sight.
Now, when I was doing my research, I did discover there's a nude beach in Miami.
There is. There is.
Is that on our tour list?
No, because Jen would kill me. That is a no.
I didn't think it was going to be for some reason.
No. Also in network news, just letting you guys know that I just did an interview with George, who is the newest member of the Flintstone Media team. He's coming on and He's going to be handling a bunch of special projects for us, and that includes a bunch of stuff for Horse Radio Network and a bunch of stuff for Florida Podcast Network, which is why this is appropriate for me to mention here. Anyways, I just recorded an intro interview to let you guys know who he is, a little bit more about him. He's so fun. I absolutely adore him. So that intro interview will be coming out hopefully sometime this week. So keep paying attention. It'll be released on the Florida Podcast Network aggregate show feed and across social media. And speaking of new things on the horizon, I will be recording a pilot episode of a new show, and I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am. So I was going to record it this week, but my guest daughter was sick, so I'm recording it next week. But I can't really give you any details yet, but all I can say is I'm so excited. So I hope once the details start to come out, you guys will be equally excited. But if you want to be the first to know, make sure that you join FPN Insiders, which is our closed group on Facebook. I'll be announcing details in there first. Other than that, please remember to also subscribe for our newsletter at floridapodcastingnews.com. And with that, we will get to our tip of the week. Well, as we mentioned at the top of the show, I had the grand honor of teaching this week at Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And I kind of split it up into two separate, it was easy. It was a two-day course. So it was easy to split it up into two different things, a podcasting 101, where I covered the basics, and a podcasting 102. And so I decided to pull this tip from that curriculum. And it's something that we hear being advised, and I'm so happy every time someone brings this up, or when I see someone learn this skill new. It's creating your own listener avatar. And it's really, really most powerful to do this when you're just in the beginning of developing a show. But honestly, you can do this at any time, and you should do this regularly, actually, throughout having a show. So what is a listener avatar? No, it's not creating a really exercise blue human. It is putting together an idea, almost crafting a character of who your ideal listener is, or would be, or could be, or should be. So what was really great about this class that I did at CSB, I had 4 students. And so we as a group, we came up with one singular show concept to flesh out over the course of the day. And it had to do with UFC fighting. And then I had them decide on who their host character was, and they made up a character for the host. But more importantly, I had them decide, okay, who is the listener of the show? And they did this individually. What was interesting is that they came up with this listener character all on their own, but it completely diverged the show concepts. Now we went from having one singular show concept to having 4 different concepts, and it's all because it really mattered who they thought would be listening to their show. And when we say listener avatar, it means, man, woman, how old is this person? What do they do for a living? Did they graduate college? Do they have kids? Do they like to go to the bar to drink after work? Or do they go work out on the weekends? All these different things. You can give them a name, completely make it up. There are really no wrong answers. But developing a listener avatar and having that in your mind and in front of you when you're developing your show can really help you flesh out all the ideas of how to speak to that particular person. But then also when you're recording an episode, it can be really helpful to pretend that you're talking to that person. And it ends up making the show a lot more personal and just connecting with the listener a little bit more. And then third, also by doing this, by crafting your ideal listener and then creating a show concept around that listener, what you're also at the same time doing is creating a concept for attracting a particular type of sponsor. And so you have this listener avatar and this person in your mind who you're targeting your show towards. Well, guess what? Businesses who might want to consider sponsoring your show, they also have a target audience and a target customer that they're shooting for. And if you can make those two things overlap, that means that you're more likely to attract that kind of sponsor. If you can create a very clear idea of who your listener is, and it's the same exact kind of person that this company is niched to provide products and services for, then they're more likely to want to sponsor your show. So take some time if you're thinking about doing a show, just in the early start developing your show, to really think who is your target listener, and then think about that person with every episode. And then all of your marketing materials, everything you're putting out there, every touch point when you're looking to attract sponsors, you need to keep that customer, that listener, that niche in mind. And that is our tip of the week.
You know what's
Anything to
interesting?
add, Glenn?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and I was thinking about in my days in improv theater.
Mhm.
And when you'd have an audience of 400 people in front of you, and you would pick one person out. I would
Yeah.
always pick one person. I wouldn't pick the super grumpy person because they're not going to like anything.
They're no fun.
Right. And I wouldn't pick the person that laughed at everything. I would pick kind of the in-between person who basically was our avatar, right? The average person. And when they laughed, I knew we were doing well. When they didn't, I knew that we weren't going to do that again. So I always picked out that one person, and I really focused on that person. And most performers do that. It's so funny because I kind of do that with Horses in the Morning, our live daily show. We have this listener named Kayla, and Kayla's kind of our average listener, but I know she listens every day. And I kind of think, would Kayla be laughing at that? Would Kayla like that? You know, it's funny because I do pick out one. I didn't realize it till just now that I subconsciously do that.
Yeah, and so these four students of mine, like I said, we started with one singular concept of a UFC fighter, show. But one person, he wanted to do his show to look at the intersection of fighting in anime and or fighting in pop culture and fighting these kinds of fights used in movies and those types of things. Completely different show than another student who wanted to talk about how UFC fighting compares to the history of other sports and athletics and the development of them throughout history. Completely different show, right? So, I mean, that's just two of the four. It was just they had such divergence. I know another guy wanted to speak to an audience of people who wanted to be UFC fighters. So it was all about nutrition and sports. And so three now totally different show concepts, all because they decided to think of who do they want their target listener to be. And now you have potential sponsors like maybe a supplements company that was looking at that last final show, whereas someone who's a sports historian who's written a book, they might be wanting to sponsor the second show. So it's really important, and it can add a lot of value to your podcast and your overall business angle.
You realize if I was in that class, I would have had no idea what you were talking about, right?
You would have been the star of the show.
UFC, what? I have no idea. Anime, yeah, okay. Well, that's it for this episode. You can find more updates on all of this and other news, plus details and show notes about today's episode, and sign up to receive the newsletter that accompanies this podcast by going to floridapodcastingnews.com. We do really love your feedback. Join us in our closed Facebook group exclusively for superfans of the Florida Podcast Network shows, and we have a little fun in there too. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments and to gain access to early scoops, contests, and other special treats. So we look forward to meeting you in there. And if you have any podcasting news to submit to our show or to our newsletter, please email them to Jaime, Jaime, at floridapodcastnetwork.com.
Many thanks to this week's sponsor, Flintstone Media, my company there. And be sure to visit all the great shows in the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them. You'll never guess the URL, Glenn. You'll never guess where.
I have no idea.
At floridapodcastnetwork.com. Until next time, thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.